Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Sioux Falls Fiscal Committee meeting for March 5th, 2019. And a little personal privilege, it is also my wife's birthday today, so hopefully we keep things moving along as she is probably spending her birthday watching us this afternoon. So
that does not get you out of buying her a present.
no, I'm well done with that. So after almost 30 years of marriage, I've got that under control. So thank you all for being here this afternoon. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes of the meeting of Tuesday, December 4th, 2018. And I'd entertain a motion to do that. Councilor Sale?
I so move.
Thank you. Second?
Second, Neitzer.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. What I plan for this afternoon for the Fiscal Committee meeting is the state of South Dakota and our governor led a House concurrent resolution that was passed this session talking about E30 as a premium fuel. And this afternoon I've invited Mr. Doug Bervin from POET. He is the Vice President of Corporate Affairs and the Department of Public Works. Director Cotter is also here to answer some questions and just give us an update of what we do with renewable fuels, flex fuel vehicles. I'll use the wrong terminology, so I'll stop now before we get too far into that. And if Mr. Bervin would come to the podium and just, I know he's got a few remarks and probably some questions when we get to that point if we could. So, Mr. Bervin.
Good evening, council members. Thanks for letting me be here. I have a few prepared remarks, and then I really hope to open it up to Q&A and a more direct dialogue. So my name is Doug Bervin. I am the Vice President of Corporate Affairs at POET. I'm also the Executive Director of the South Dakota Ethanol Producers Association. As many of you know, POET is the world's largest biofuel producer. In our company, our team members are proud to call Sioux Falls home. We've been in operation for more than 30 years. We're headquartered here in Sioux Falls with 7 biorefineries in the state of South Dakota and another 21 around the country. We're one of the largest employers in the state of South Dakota and also one of the largest companies by revenue with about $8 billion in 2018 revenues, believe it or not. Let me just start by saying thank you for inviting me to visit with you about the economic benefits of higher biofuel blends like E30. We're delighted to hear that the City of Sioux Falls may soon consider following the state of South Dakota toward fueling city-owned vehicles with E30, a biofuel blend of 30% ethanol, produced from corn grown right here in South Dakota. And your timing is excellent. In recent years, both federal and state governments provided funds for fuel retailers to install blender pumps that can dispense a variety of ethanol blends, including E30. So it's safe to expect the availability of E30 fuel to grow in the future. During her 2018 campaign, Governor Kristi Noem pledged to move the state's vehicle fleet to E30. And last month, the South Dakota legislature announced their support for E30 with passage of House Concurrent Resolution 1001, citing several key factors. The legislature affirmed that E30 is a high-performance fuel that saves taxpayers money, lowers emissions in our communities, and supports local industry, including agriculture and biofuel producers. I'll walk through each of the factors a little bit more closely. Number one, fuel savings. For years, consumers have enjoyed savings from higher ethanol blends like E30. Today, E30 is offered at a number of retail fuel locations across South Dakota, including right here in Sioux Falls. And it's easy to understand why so-called mid-level ethanol blends are becoming increasingly popular. The more ethanol that's blended into gasoline, the lower the cost of the fuel. In February 2019, the average reported fuel price for E10, which is a common U.S. gasoline fuel, in South Dakota was $2.20, while the average reported price for E30 was $2.07. That represents a 13-cent savings per gallon. And that's on top of the already 30 to 40 cent savings that we get just by blending 10% ethanol in the fuel supply. Okay? Greater fuel savings from higher blends can and should be achieved for taxpayers too. State and local agencies can easily reduce their fuel costs by moving government-owned vehicles to E30 and E15 where available. Number 2 is engine performance. Ethanol is a fuel, dates back to the 1800s and the Model T, believe it or not. The Model T was the first flex fuel vehicle that could run on gasoline or ethanol or any combination thereof. Considerable testing has proven that mid-level blends like E30 and E15 improve performance in modern automotive engines and clean engine system. But there's also real-world evidence. For years, consumers in South Dakota have fueled their vehicles with E30 with no reported instances of mechanical failure. Technically, today, E30 is approved for sale by the Federal Trade Commission for use in flex fuel vehicles with certain labeling requirements. Specifically, labels for ethanol flex fuel must be printed in black on orange backgrounds. The labels must disclose the exact percentage of volume of ethanol, such as E30. Flex fuel vehicles are specifically designed to operate on any ratio of gasoline between E10 and E85. And you can determine if a vehicle is a flex fuel by looking at the inside of a vehicle's fuel door, if there's a flex fuel badge in the rear of the vehicle, if the vehicle has a yellow E85 gas cap, or if it's noted in the owner's manual. So that's technically speaking. Practically speaking, several third-party studies with millions of real-world miles have shown E30 is used in flex fuel vehicles and non-flex fuel vehicles with no discernible difference. Number 3 is reducing harmful emissions. Higher blends of ethanol like E30 are much better for the environment than conventional gasoline. According to the USDA, recently did a study on greenhouse gases and said that ethanol is at least 43% better than gasoline from a greenhouse gas standpoint. And that's expected to get to about 50% as current trends improve over the next several years, which is really significant because when we're talking about the environment today, it usually comes at a significant cost. Ethanol is an energy source that gives you tremendous greenhouse gas savings at a lower cost. That's almost unheard of in the world of new energy. So, for example, moving from E10 to E15 nationally would reduce an additional 10 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions per year. That's the equivalent to removing about 10.5 million vehicles from the road. From a public health standpoint, it's important to note that ethanol burns cleaner than conventional gasoline and significantly reduces tailpipe emissions, including toxins such as benzene, toluene, xylene. So ethanol replaces the most toxic and the most expensive chemicals in the fuel supply. It's important to know because not only it's good for the environment, it's good for human health. Number 4, farming, jobs, and economic benefits. South Dakota is one of the top ethanol producing states in the nation, producing more than 1 billion gallons of ethanol each year. In the process, we also produce millions of pounds of distillers grains and corn oil, as well as increasing variety of value-added renewable product like the one we recently introduced, rejuvenating asphalt. So now we have renewable product going into asphalt, which is tremendous for a lot of different reasons. Biofuel production in South Dakota supports thousands of jobs, higher wages across the state, culminating in millions of dollars of added state and local tax revenue, totaling $3.8 billion in economic value. Biofuel production is also essential to the current and future health of family farming. Ethanol in South Dakota provides demand for 350 million bushels of corn on an annual basis. In the recent good years of agriculture, ethanol has been the driving force of those good times. In lean years, ethanol can make the difference between a farmer going bankrupt or a farmer making it. Considerations. For all these reasons, POET believes that E30 would be an excellent fuel choice for the city of Sioux Falls. As the City Council examines the possibility of an E30 fueling program for city-owned vehicles, we recommend you take a few of the following considerations under advisement. Number 1, city may want to consider a resolution to update departmental fueling policies to include E30 when available and E15 when it's not available. The city should consider identifying all existing 2001 and newer flex fuel vehicles in the city's fleet to structure a program that can lower costs while meeting the fuel needs of the city's fleet. 3, the city should consider identifying existing fuel infrastructure and examining current fueling policies. For example, are most city vehicles fueled at center depots or retail stations? The city should consider any necessary upgrades to its fueling infrastructure, including pumps, below ground fuel tanks, and identifying potential fuel procurement or partnerships with local retailers. The city should identify and post all retail locations that offer E30 as a fuel option for their employees. And lastly, the city may want to consider fueling policy education programs for city employees, as well as fuel stickers in city vehicles that clearly indicate the city's fuel policy for that vehicle. Thank you for the opportunity to explain the benefits of ethanol and specifically E30 to this community or this committee. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Bourbon. Do we want to hear from Director Cotter first of kind of what our infrastructure is first, or would we like to ask questions of Mr. Bourbon first? Go ahead, Councilor Sale.
One question. You talked about 350 million bushels of corn. Do you know what percentage of that is of the corn produced in South Dakota?
Well, that's a good question. Nationwide, we buy about 35% of the U.S. corn crop. I would guess it's fairly similar in the state of South Dakota. About 35% of the crop.
Thank you.
Councilor Neitzer.
For something like this to work, is this something where the governmental entity would make a commitment to buy all flex fuel vehicles going forward?
Okay, so this is the interesting part. Like I said in the remarks, technically E30 is for flex fuel vehicles. Practically, anything can run on E30. E30 has been run in vehicles for millions and millions of miles, and there's no problem with it. The reason that E30, in my opinion, is for flex fuel vehicles is for the designation, it's for the regulation, it's to understand, it's to help the automakers in their certification process of their engines on different types of fuels. From a practical standpoint, E30 is a perfectly fine fuel for non-flex fuel vehicles as well as flex fuel vehicles. I have my vehicles run on E30 all the time, and I have never had a problem. And you know, there have been a lot of third-party studies that show that non-flex fuel vehicles have run just perfectly fine on E30. But technically speaking, it is for flex fuel vehicles.
And I believe I've read that research myself, that it's probably fine, no problem, and it's tested. There's two maybe questions to that and two challenges that people would maybe make would be, number one, I'll call it off-label use, I guess, that it would run afoul of some EPA regulations or something, if there's any of that comes into play. You know, like for example, my vehicle, if I read the owner's manual, would say no more than 15 or 20%. Does that make it, as far as emissions goes or something, does that make it go outside the boundaries of what it's supposed to? I'm not all familiar with how the EPA regulations work on vehicles. And then the other thing that people typically will bring up, which is not applicable to me anymore, is manufacturer warranty. Right. You know, that the vehicle, my vehicle says 15 or 20% maximum. I'm out of the warranty, but it says that, you know, if you were to use more, it may void your warranty, blah, blah, blah. I suppose if they could prove that there was some damage to your engine. So, I mean, how would you answer both of those? If we buy a brand new vehicle for our fleet and the manufacturer warranty says don't use more than 20% and we have a warranty, should we be putting E30 in it? And I mean, you're not an attorney, but you know, risking our warranty. Do people ask you about that?
I'm not an attorney and I'm not an EPA official. To give you the legalistic answer, if you are having people fuel up with E30 in a car that is not warranted for E30, you're taking on some risk, okay? Because that car isn't warranted for that fuel. What I would tell you from a practical standpoint is you're not going to have any problem, so your risk is minimal at most, okay? I was just talking to a mechanic today, one of the most well-known mechanics in the area. And I asked him about this question, you know, what do you think about E30 in a non-flex fuel vehicle? I know we've had this conversation that it's perfectly fine for everything, but realistically, what do you think? And the mechanic told me, look, anybody that makes a car to run on 10% ethanol, alcohol, is making their car to run on any amount of alcohol, really. I mean, there's not a different tolerance for 30% than 10%. What you're really talking about from an ethanol perspective is certification process, computer programming, emissions. But our research shows that the more ethanol you have in the fuel, the better your emissions are out of the tailpipe. So you're not going to be causing a problem with emissions. So those are, you know, from a practical standpoint and technical standpoint, they're a little bit in argument with each other. In reality, I don't think you're going to see any problem whatsoever with E30 in any vehicle that the city has as a fleet at all. Okay. In fact, I think you're going to actually really enjoy it. You know, ethanol acts as a solvent in engines as well. So if you start using ethanol as a fuel in your brand new car, that engine is always going to be clean. If you don't use ethanol as a fuel, you're going to have deposits build up, and it's like an artery system, okay? It starts building a pre-existing condition, okay? And ethanol will keep your engine clean. And there are studies out there that show that ethanol will actually add to the life of your vehicle because of its cleaning factor and the fact that it burns cooler and more efficiently.
Yeah, and worth pointing out, my dad's a retired auto mechanic, and so we've talked about one of the properties of ethanol is it's a solvent. So things like cleaning your lifters and your valves and things like that, you know, maybe you don't have to do a engine cleaning quite as often. So it helps to keep, as you talked about, keep those deposits off of there, keep the gunk from building up. So there's a benefit that you get.
Absolutely.
You get in that. And I guess my other questions are going to be for the director when we get to that point. So I'm very interesting. Thanks for the education.
Thank you. I just have one question that from a technical side, I mean, from your perspective, if I start with E10 in my vehicle and I can have the ability to go all the way to E85, you would probably be telling me that I should be at E85 rather than E30. So what's the point in the multiple levels, or where is there a benefit somewhere in between of going all the way to 85?
Sure. Okay. So without getting too technical on this point, E85 is anywhere between 51 and 83% ethanol. That's the range of ethanol, okay? When you blend ethanol into a fuel, your octane level goes up very fast to start out with, and then it levels out. At about 45% ethanol, you start getting a diminishing return in octane. As a mechanic, you know octane well, I'm sure. Yeah. And your BTU level comes down a little bit because there's less energy in ethanol than there is gasoline. Somewhere around that E30 mark, you get the maximum octane and the maximum BTU content or energy content in the fuel. And that's why E30 is such a sweet spot for a fuel. It offers you all of the emissions qualities, all of the performance qualities, the power qualities, the mileage, and everything else that goes along with it without any of the downside at all. And so part of my job is to work with the autos to come up with future solutions for fuels and engines. And they are looking for a higher octane fuel. And that higher octane fuel in this country, if they could wave a wand, would be about an E30 blend. It's basically a premium fuel. E30 is going to be about a 93 octane fuel. So you're basically buying a premium fuel at a lower than a 87 octane price.
Perfect, and not too technical for me to understand by the time we're done, so thank you. Okay. I'm going to get Director Cotter. We've got about 15 minutes before we get to public input, so we want to keep us going. But if you would stay close, because I'm sure that we're going to blend questions here by the time we're done, possibly.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you for being here today.
No pun
Oh,
intended.
blend, that's good. Take credit for
Good
that.
afternoon, Council Chair and Fiscal Committee. Thanks for having us. Thank you, Doug. We've got a great partnership with Poet, as you guys just know, with a recent re-signing of the landfill gas contract. We certainly support ethanol. We've got 4 fueling sites for the city that not only do the city vehicles use, but multiple other outside agencies use. And so today I wanted to just kind of frame up for you guys the use, the amount that we normally dispense, give you a sense of where we've been, and timing's good. When we were developing the budget last year, one of the important aspects for the mayor was for us to path forward to use more ethanol, and so you'll see in the capital project for 2019, we actually have a fueling upgrade for the chamber site that will include us taking a path even further where we're at with ethanol. So if you're familiar with where down the Street Fleet campus, that's one of our larger fueling sites. We have a lot of diesel tanks there and also regular. We have a school district site that's over by the Operations Center. That's just west of the Premier Center. We have the Park Shop on 49th Street, and then we have the landfill site. I'll give you just a sense of what we dispense at those. Know today that everything we use for regular, everything today is E10, and our initial path will be to path to E15. And then we have other opportunities for our flex fuel fleet as well. So at our overall in 2018, we dispensed about 507,000 gallons of diesel and about 470,000 gallons of E10. The reason that we've up until this point have taken E10 is that we've always felt comfortable that we can take E10 in all of our small engines and also every vehicle that we have. And between parks, with everything from a trimmer to some of their small lawnmowers and chainsaws and what have you, we've ran E10 and intend to stay with E10 for our small engines. We know that most of our flex and non-flex vehicles can certainly take E15, and so we're actually on a path to change from E10 to E15 to take that blend up to the next level. I'll give you a sense of where we have. So at the Street Fleet campus, along with the diesel tanks, we've got 1 E10 tank. That's where our major investment will be in 2019 in your capital book that you'll see. And then we're updating pumps, we're updating some of our lines, our submersible pumps, which will allow us to take a path toward E15 at that location. We'll also be making plans so we can actually further enhance our fueling and potentially take that up to E30 there. The school district site, we actually there have an E85 tank disbursement and an E10. And that's been a very popular location for our ethanol blends at that location. At the Park Shop, we have E10 and diesel, and then the landfill site, we have E10 and diesel. Give you a sense of our vehicle breakdown. We've got 207 flex fuel vehicles, 439 non-flex fuel vehicles. So about a third of our vehicles today are flex fuel. So we could certainly feel comfortable going to E15, and ultimately we've got the E85 site at the at the school district site. Can appreciate everything that Doug said about E30, and that'll be part of our master plan as we transition into higher blends of ethanol. Minnehaha County's got 23 flex fuel vehicles and 183 non-flex fuel vehicles. And so we also want you to know that not only are we looking at each one of our fueling sites for how can we take higher blends of ethanol, but we're also preparing for the electric expected movement, and so we'll be making conduit and those kinds of investments. We won't be actually putting in charging stations at this point, but I know Councilor Brecky asked that at one of our budget meetings, and we want you guys to know that that's a part of what we expect the fleets will change, will evolve to over time, and we want to make sure that we're positioned for that. So some of our next steps are, not only have we budgeted and we've started some of those designs, is to start to talk to our outside agencies that buy fuel from us and really start that coordinated effort on making these strategic changes. We still want to have E10 for our small engines, but we can accomplish that, we feel, very straightforward, and then start to transition our E10 use for vehicles up to E15. So I'm here to answer any questions that you have, and it's been a good topic. It's a timely topic, and we know when South Dakota wins, Sioux Falls wins too. So thanks.
Thank you, Director Cotter. Councilor Neitzer.
That was actually an interesting point you brought up about the small engines, and I should have thought about that because I do have some small engines, you know, like weed whackers and snow blowers, and for example, that say no ethanol, period, which, by the way, is, I have to go to a special gas station just to track down no ethanol, you know, around here for things like that. So I'm guessing that you kind of indicated is playing into a little bit of where you would land.
We run E10 in all those. We just know that we're going to, you know, we'll be, as a part of our rollout, to transition to E15, because we know that we can do that across the board. All of our flex and non-flex fuels can do that. We've got our E85 tank at the school district, but then as a part of our fueling site upgrades at the Chambers site this year, we're positioning ourselves for higher blends of ethanol, like E30, with the right conduits, the right dispensaries, things of that nature.
Would that be, like the small engines, is that just something you just have to test as far as like trying out E15, or would you just use the other pumps like the Park Station for 10 for a while? Or
No, I think, you know, one of the things that we think will make the most sense is those surface mounted tanks that have their own spill prevention containment you can purchase, and so we can buy them on a skid. They hold several thousand gallons. We'll take power to them in a low voltage so we can test the, you know, so we always know what the inventories are inside those. But we feel like we can get 2 surface mounted tanks inside our compounds, and it's also be good education for, you know, signage on those tanks that say small engine only. But we still expect to use E10 on our small engines.
Okay, and then finally, I guess I haven't looked recently, and I don't know how much you look at this as far as, you know, buying for the fleet, but what the price differential is for a flex fuel vehicle versus a non-flex fuel. Like, for example, if you're going to buy whatever it is these days, you know, a Taurus, or I'm sure that doesn't exist anymore, but you know what I mean.
Right.
What the price differential is, and whether you try to go flex, and what, and are flex fuels available for the type of vehicle that you're looking for, that sort of thing.
We're seeing a somewhat of a change and shift in that, but that's really probably a question for purchasing that we could come in at a later time. The opportunities to buy flex, not every vehicle, and we buy a number of vehicles off the state bid list. Not every one of those has a flex option. And so that becomes one of those decision points that we look at.
Okay, and I do have a question for Doug, but I can wait until
Thank you.
anybody else has any questions.
I just had one for Director Cotter while you're still there. Maybe we'll be a little less. Of the numbers that you gave us between the flex fuel capable and the non-flex fuel, is that all of our city vehicles, or those are ones that have the potential that they could be a flex fuel vehicle at some point in the future when you did that breakdown?
Well, they're either flex or they're not. And so we've got 207 that are flex fuel vehicles, and we have 439 that are non-flex.
Gotcha. I was trying to make sure that we weren't including pickups in that number that are larger size vehicles in that. And what you're saying is they're not.
Yeah.
Part of that, it's not like a snowplow isn't in that number.
Yeah, they're in the diesel category.
Right. So that was where I was headed. So,
Yep.
Doug, if you don't mind, Councilor Neitzer has a question.
Thank you. With the movement, as you probably know, some of the manufacturers are moving where they're saying they're kind of getting rid of cars, more or less, or they're getting very aggressive about that because the sales seem to be trending towards trucks, CUVs, SUVs. Does Does that have any bearing to you or impact, do you think, as far as, will you still see flex and E30 still works? Because obviously traditionally when you think about, a flex fuel and good mileage and things, you're thinking about cars. But, I mean, do you see any impact to you? Is that going to continue with these sorts of vehicles if they move in that direction? And obviously, gas prices drive things. If gas prices start shifting, maybe the market changes and people want cars again. But does it matter? Cars, trucks, SUVs?
Yeah, the short answer is no. It doesn't matter. Cars, trucks, whatever it happens to be. As long as there's an internal combustion engine, there's going to be liquid fuels, and I think those are going to be around for as far as the eye can see. When it comes to flex fuel vehicles in particular, the cost differential is basically nothing. I mean, the difference in a flex fuel versus a non-flex fuel vehicle coming up from an auto manufacturer is the certification program and the software programming. So a flex fuel vehicle can understand the differences in octane between E0 and E85, where a non-flex fuel vehicle is programmed to understand it's 87 octane and that's it. There's no difference in the parts or anything like that in a flex fuel versus a non-flex fuel vehicle. And then I just wanted to touch on the small engine piece real quickly. 10% ethanol is the certification fuel of the United States. So virtually every gallon of gasoline in this country, labeled or not labeled, has 10% ethanol in it. Every engine in this country is manufactured for 10% ethanol. If the owner's manual says don't put ethanol in it, I'd go look at a different manufacturer because they don't know what they're building their engine for. And I've said this before, if you got a 30-year-old small engine, it's probably running fine. If you got a 2-year-old small engine, it's probably not doing so good. But small engines are perfectly fine and they're manufactured for E10 today.
I think it's probably a Japanese weed whacker. They don't, who knows? So they probably don't know the engine rules here or whatever. It's just, well, anyway, so.
They may not, but yeah, most, in South Dakota, we label all of our ethanol. In most states, they don't label their ethanol. So most states in this country have been blending 10% ethanol for years and they don't even know it.
Well, maybe I won't be going and searching in vain for the no ethanol pump anymore and just get the 10 and be done with it.
I wouldn't do it because you're getting a lesser quality fuel at a much higher price.
Interesting. Well, you learn something new every day. Okay, thanks.
I think that concludes what we have for today. Mr. Brevins, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Director, also as well, thank you. Very informative. At this point, I would ask if there's anyone here that would like to offer open discussion for any of our agenda items. Seeing none, I would say this committee, what? Yeah, that's why I was just asking for public input, and there wasn't anyone that had any public input.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you. Second? All those in favor?
So moved.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.